Adil is the director of engineering at Centerfield. Stanley is a technical recruiter at Cisco Meraki and previously Meta. So we have full house of people who actually making a decision, hiring decision when you're going through the interview. And the purpose of today's session is completely educational. We will give you the mock interview and provide the feedback that usually you don't get during the interview or when you apply. When you apply, if you got rejected, you will get the generic email rejection, and that would be all. Ideal. What are you looking in the candidate? What is the red flag and green flag for you during the interview?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is by the time a candidate gets to me, I am looking for confirmation. I'll already have a good signal from the resume if I've looked at it. If I haven't, I'll already get a strong signal from the recruiter. So I'm looking to make a connection and validate the things that they have on their resume or things they already told the recruiter. That's, I think, the biggest first thing. If things match up to what the recruiter has said, what the resume contained, it's an easy conversation. Rest of the conversation is much easier. I'll have my set of questions as a manager screening. I'll have my set of questions. And the red flag would be when things are like things are not adding up. And sometimes I feel candidates make a little bit harder just by they make it a little bit harder by being a little too nervous. My job is to help them, just like Stan's job is to make them more comfortable. But if they're a little nervous, they might start talking about things that are like actually not that important. I feel like by the time you get to manager recruiting screening, you're halfway there. You're halfway there. Be comfortable in that. Be yourself. That would be a green flag.
Yeah, yeah. Stanley, how about you?
Yeah, Deal brings up a great point about being nervous, being on this side of the conversation, always interviewing people. I don't ever think that they're nervous, but when I go out and search for a job, when I'm doing interviews for a job, sometimes I get nervous too. So that's completely okay. But very similar to what Adil said, I work very closely with hiring managers to try to understand the role as best as I can. And I'm not an engineer. So oftentimes, if I'm looking for an engineering position, I'll never be as technical as them, but I could try to translate that as best as I can when I have these conversations with candidates to try to understand what they do in their job and see if there's a fit. So I look for that mostly.
Yeah, you already touched about what could help to candidates to make the interview better. The nervousness is a big part of it. But in general, Adil Stanley, what would you recommend during the interview? What about preparation? Maybe what would be your tips and hints to make interview make it easier or make it more successful?
Yeah, maybe I'll also add on a question. I'll let Stan answer first, but I'll add on another question to that. One of the things, Stan, I try to do when I'm interviewing is, especially if I'm interviewing with a technical recruiter, I'll try to let them guide the technical screening. I will force myself to not assert myself like a certain pace for that conversation because I feel like my thinking going in is if I like the company, then that recruiter is going to be my biggest advocate if I tick off all the boxes for that position. So I tend to want to let the technical recruiter set the pace, the interview. I would also like what Evgeny said, plus add that. Is that a winning strategy, or what is it that you would recommend?
No, that is a great strategy because we often times have preloaded questions we want to ask, and every recruiter asks different questions, and different things matter to different recruiters and different roles. But the reason why I was smiling so much when you said let the recruiter set the pace is because I've gone to university career fairs and I've talked to people in person. You could tell they're super nervous. They're fully wearing a suit to these events and they just pass over a piece of paper to me. And they only have, let's say, they have a long line behind them and they have, say, a minute or 2 minute conversation with me. They just word vomit, just tell me about their whole life story, where they came from, what school they went to, what they're studying, what they're interested in. And this is all before I really get a word in. So it's funny you mentioned that, because oftentimes we'll have things that we want to know specifically for the role.
Yeah. So actually, I think we can give some couple hints here too before we're going to start, right? Because we do this regularly. This is, I believe, like third or fourth year of we're doing this type of mock interviews with different hiring managers and different engineering managers. So I would say, especially when you start, usually the interview will start, tell me about yourself. And actually, today's format will start, tell me about yourself and tell me about the last project. You can combine this in one pitch generally. But just fairly quick advice, this is not about your life. This is not about your like weaknesses and the whole story. This is your pitch, like why you're a great engineer for this position, right? In terms of tell me about yourself. So make it quick, make it easy, and try breath. Take a deep breath and try to breathe and look at the reaction of higher managers, right? So that would be easy. Don't go all the way in. Tell me about yourself. That would be the first opening question. Adil, Stan, your advice, your tips.
Yeah, sure. So I usually start off my conversations with saying something along the lines of, hey, why are we talking today? Or what's your current situation right now? Because I want to get an understanding of your situation right now. Are you working? Are you not working? Are you like applying everywhere and actively looking? You got other interviews going on? Or is this because I simply just reached out to you? It just happened to sound like a good opportunity, but you're not really open. So I might have to do a little bit more selling. But that is usually the first question I like to ask, just to probe on that and get an idea of what the setting and situation is.
Yeah, Adil.
Yeah, I think Kevin in the chat had a good point. So I'll weave that into my answer. I think if you should definitely rehearse this question, it should come off very easy from you. And that kind of sets the pace. I shouldn't say the pace, it sets the mood. So this question should be like rehearsed and you should be able to automatically answer that question. Now, if you're experienced, depending on the tenure of experience, I would say if you can weave in something for the position that's interesting for the role, weave it in, but stick to mostly experience as opposed to like feelings or subjective things like I'm detail oriented. Well, like if the recruiter or the hiring manager has that specific question, they'll ask it as a situational question later on. And if you are somebody who is early on in their career and maybe right out of school, then focus on your experience in school. Highlighting your top projects is a good example of it. And I think the biggest tip here, don't be super long-winded. Look for cues that you've gone over. Some interviewers might have set aside 5 minutes for that conversation. Others may have only set aside a minute and a half. So look at that cues. If you feel like, what Evgeny said, breathe. And if you feel like if you've gone too long, it's okay to just ask, hey, I have a couple of more things I want to highlight. Should I continue? Or you can just check in. I think that's a really smart thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a guideline. That's a good guideline for today's session. Why don't we start? We'll start with the first candidate. I'll allow to talk so you can unmute yourself. Hey, candidate number one.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly. I'll share your resume. Let me do this right now. You just confirm it's your resume.
That is, in fact, my resume.
Nice. Okay, let me zoom in. Before starting the interview, just give us a brief, like what kind of position you're looking for.
Looking for senior level software engineering, test lead, test architect, something along those lines.
All right, fair. Stanley, Adil, Any questions, or let's just start it? Yeah, let's get started. Yeah, why don't you tell us about yourself and about your last project, candidate number one?
Okay, in general, my experience gives me three perspectives that I think have not only helped me to execute at a high level in software QA, but also make me unique within what I do. The first one is probably the most obvious. A lot of software engineering experience, development in a number of different languages, test automation in a number of different languages, system building, and stuff like that. The second is actually not on my resume. For about 3 years, I worked as QC in a print shop. And that gives me a really tangible intro to the sorts of things that I'm testing in software QA, whether it's manual testing or automated testing. And the third is actually at the very bottom where I studied English and German at the University of State City in City State. That my humanities background actually it gives me a third perspective beyond the physical experience. Checking logos on golf balls was how I it was the QC work I did. Being able to break down how software is relatable as a sort of statement for people. All three of those things together, they've helped me to, again, execute at a high level and embrace really three differing perspectives on this discipline.
All right. I'll give Mike a deal. Stanley, follow-up question?
Yeah, looking at your resume, it looks like you've been doing consulting for the last 2, 3 years or so. What happened after that company you were at from 21 to 23? And what kind of projects have you taken on since then?
Oh, that's right. There was a question about what I was working on. So, what happened after the company that I worked at between 2021 and 2023? I found myself with a decision to make. What am I going to do with all the experience I have, and how am I going to approach doing the work that I do? If you look at my resume, if you look at the last, and I'll thread in what my last project was there. If you look at the last couple places I worked, what do I call them? Web analytics SaaS developer and student information systems SaaS developer. What they were bringing me in for was to evaluate frameworks and to evaluate sort of their processes as they were at the time. We had these things that we're doing. The web analytics SaaS developer, they had a rather complex cross-browser integration test framework written in TypeScript that I spent one of the last projects I was on. I spent a lot of time evaluating that and providing feedback on this is what's working, this is what's not working, and removing static waits and confirming that tests still ran as expected if I was able to remove like 10 minutes of static waits. At the student information system developer and the web analytics developer, I actually built out the student information system, built out a full test harness in TypeScript to be able to test like Angular in memory. And then I was working on roughly the same thing at the web analytics company at the same time. What was my last project? I can't, like, I was working on a lot of different things at the same time. The reason I decided to pivot into consulting was if you look at the work that I was being asked to do at those companies, and the tenure that I ended up having, it looked like what they were looking for was a consultant. They needed a consultant to come in and help them understand what was working and what was not working, and how would I do this differently, and what would I propose as a solution for the sorts of problems that they outlined for me. So I figured, okay, that's what people are asking for. Why not try this out as a consultant? Again, in 2023, I had a decision to make. What am I going to do? Do I want to try to do the same thing that appears not to be working, or it appears to be working, but only so much, or would I rather try going into it for myself?
Okay, thanks for sharing that. So I overall thought your answer was good. I think that was borderline excessive in terms of the like details that you told me about. Maybe it's just my question that was a little bit open-ended, but I was actually really curious about what you did as a consultant, and I was curious about what happened in 2023 for you to leave and go into consulting. But overall, I thought it was a good answer. You gave me a very quick overview of your experience at SIS and at the web analytics company as well. And so you did give me a reason of why you went into consulting, but I was more curious about the actual projects you did while you were consulting.
Oh, while I was consulting. So while would you like me to answer that question now
Oh,
or?
sure.
Okay. And also I apologize for my chairs. My chair is 15 years old and it makes noises. So a lot of what I did was two things. It was I developed a custom static site generator to be able to that I tested in some capacities in order to be able to deliver a blog. I was in WordPress and I got frustrated with it. I got frustrated with a lot of the Jamstack stuff I was looking at. Anyway, that's a lot of fast talking. The other thing that I worked on is, in my experience, a lot of companies seem like they could benefit from testing tooling that's ready made. So a lot of companies will bring somebody in and ask them to build a framework for them. And what they really need is like a test runner and something that they get, a library that they can use to interact with an API and write authentication code on top of it, or be able to resolve configurations passed through like environment variables and in a file, be able to resolve those sort of on the fly. Anyway, there's a lot of detail, but like those are the sort of projects I've been working on. It's been in preparation for, I've been trying to prospect as much as I can. I get the impression that's what you're digging for here. What have I been doing for whom? There's a lot of prospecting, a lot of preparing for once I eventually work with somebody. This is what I can have ready to be prepared to work with them.
Got it. And why are you looking to interview here? Why are you interested in this company?
I saw your requisition and it piqued my interest. It seems like the sort of responsibilities, the sort of work that you would have me do, it seems like it aligns well with what I've been doing already and provides an opportunity for growth. And then beyond that, I looked up you guys' company, your website, and I was really impressed by not just the product that you guys make, how you're able to solve this specific problem for your customers, but also the sort of culture that you guys outline you have on your about page, the values that you provide. I was really impressed, and I think they really resonate with who I feel like I am and type of place I feel like I might like to work.
Okay. Yeah, I like that answer. It shows that you did a lot of research into our company, checked out our values, checked out the work itself, not just the role, but the work and the company values, and you could see yourself aligned there. I like that answer overall. The only other feedback I would say is I would say this was one of the tips I was going to give earlier before we started all this is just know your audience, right? What happens a lot of times as a recruiter is that we'll have I'll have a conversation with engineers who will essentially give me a lot of details about their work and their project. And some of that stuff gets really technical, or they'll use a lot of acronyms that might be very specific to their projects that I'm just unaware of. But I would say just know your audience, who you're talking to. And for most recruiters, I would say you could keep it fairly high level and fairly basic, as long as they get the basic gist of what you've been doing at X company. But with a hiring manager, you definitely want to dive deeper into these projects, talk a little bit more about the tech, and talk a little bit more about specifics.
Awesome. We have a little bit of time, Evgeny?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Speaking of that, Stan, let me toss one technical question over to you, candidate number one. In your resume, you talk about quality strategy and risk analysis on a feature flag management system with Terraform and LaunchDarkly. Can you give me a little bit more color there and tell me a little bit about the impact this had on experiments that this team was running and testing?
Okay. So this was presented to me is it was a very high level description of it was my supervisor at the time approached me on Slack actually and gave me a really high level overview of what he was looking for. We're looking for a testing problem statement for this feature flag system that we use. I didn't at the beginning I didn't know anything about it other than as a feature flag system it used Launch Darkly. I spent quite a bit of time. Oh, how do I answer this question better? Something that I do when I develop testing strategy and write testing plans or test plans is how do I boil functionality, something between functionality, the value that the functionality delivers, openness to like what's the sort of output it provides, openness to testing and stuff like that. How do I boil that down into a sort of engineering problem statement? So rather than just as a process thing, this is what we need to test in order to get it done. How do I really understand it as an engineering problem? I spent a lot of time. I'm trying to keep this simple. It took me like a month to do. I spent a lot of time understanding more about Launch Darkly and what it does, not just what it does as a high level, which is segregate use between users. Like a company may define, I want half of my users to be able to use this, or figure out for me, if I recall correctly, at random, I want to be able to A/B test this or something like that. There's a number of different configurations that you can trust, like configure a feature flag for and have Launch Darkly deploy it. I spent a lot of time getting really deep into what does Launch Darkly do, how does it do it, and what is the value that that provides. Beyond that, I spent quite a bit of time. I'm going to try not to get too deep into like the plumbing because I think it's proprietary being recorded. There was a way in which the company used the other technologies you mentioned in order to be able to provision, like create, set and code a configuration and expect that a provision flag be provisioned and launched darkly, and then that client code in one of the programming languages that they use also be provisioned. And so I followed the same sort of, like I was describing with Launch Darkly. How do you really understand it, break it down, and understand what the engineering problem is there? Did that with this as well, and all together came up with a problem statement explaining at a high level, this is what the solution is, this is what the value that the solution is, framed in such a way like you wouldn't want anything to go wrong. This is all in a Google Docs document. Like, this is the value it provides. It segregates as expected between expected users and unexpected users, and it does these other things in order to be able to do that. Now, in the next section, I went through and said, if something were to go wrong with this solution, this is what the impact of an issue might be. And beyond that, these are the sorts of issues that I foresee, and these are the sorts of impacts that I see those issues having. And then once I outlined all those things, there was an additional section outlining, if I recall correctly, these are the sorts of things within this solution, within the different parts I've outlined, I might go about testing at a high level. And if I recall correctly, I think I provided some detail as well as to how I might, within either of the languages that they provide, this is how I might go about testing it. I think there were a couple even low level test plans for it. Anyway, sorry, that's a lot of detail, but that was how I approached it. The sort of impact it had, I didn't have I didn't have insight into that. It was something that was requested that I do, and I did it. I spent some time. There was actually somebody on another team. So I worked on a delivery team, and there was somebody on a team in platform engineering, if I recall correctly, who was responsible for this. I talked to him and made sure I had the details correct. Beyond that, I provided the problem statement, published it, and I really didn't hear anything back about it. So the impact was nobody seemed to have a problem with it. It seemed the supervisor had asked me for it. I shared with him that it was done as well, provided a link to Google Docs. Didn't really hear anything back from it. And in QA, sometimes not hearing back it means that you did enough, right? You didn't hear about any issues. So that was, if it helps, I think that's the most complete answer I can provide to your question.
Awesome. Thank you. If this was a real interview, I would ask more follow-up questions around this, but in the interest of time, I'll move forward with just my feedback. Number one thing is, I think for you, can I remind yourself to keep your answers short, like shorter than you're comfortable with. Because right now, what happened in this answer, there were a lot of details that I have to now filter out to focus on like the most important parts of the answer. And the hint there was like the impact. And since it just wasn't it just wouldn't be a good answer if you just said, hey, it was a task I was assigned, so I did it. Right? And that's just something for you to think about from your story bank, because that is something that jumps out to me from your resume. So it's going to jump out to other folks. They're going to ask you questions. So you just want to make sure you have you tell the story. The other thing I would add is the STAR method is not the know-all be-all of answering technical questions, but it might help you, either STAR method or something else for yourself, to make sure you hit the most important parts of your answers. I think overall, you did an okay job thinking about it from that perspective, but the execution wasn't there because there was a lot of detail that I had to filter out to remain on task. I think those are my biggest areas of feedback. Tying into Stan, maybe I'll ask you a question. If you've been interviewing recently, is that something that's already on top of your mind? Has this helped?
I feel like you're asking me a lot of different things. Let's see what I can do to respond to them directly. So when somebody asks me for color on what I did, I try to explain the problem and how I solve it. That's actually something that in my experience has been pretty helpful and helps distinguish me from a lot of the other people in my field. Software QA tends to be very task-based, not really problem-solving based. So if it helps, that's sort of where I was going from there. I'm already off task.
Totally. I know.
I guess I have a question for you, and
Yeah.
I don't mean to be combative at all, but it might help get to the bottom of as we talk about this. Your question was help give me some color as to what was going on. And like I kept it high level. I could have gotten in really into the weeds on what I was doing, but there was a lot going on. How do I boil the problem down? This complex problem. What was the document that I came up with? What was the technology I was working with? So I guess one option I see is to take you at your word when you ask me for something and give you exactly what you asked for as well as I can. The other is to clarify with you now, what really are you asking for here? Because there's a lot of detail and it was something that was just assigned to me. What would you prefer there?
I love the last part of what you just said. You feel comfortable asking the interviewer when you're not sure. Ask clarifying questions. They will never work against you. I'm not saying necessarily you, but myself included in the past and other folks that I speak to, they feel like once a question comes in, they feel the pressure. They're answering it themselves. But it is a conversation. I love the last piece that you said. Clarify, just clarify when you're not sure as to the direction of the question. One of the techniques I'll use is I'll like summarize something down to really two important sentences about the story I'm about to tell. And I'll ask, hey, is this an example matches what you're looking for? I might clarify like how deep my answer should go. And based on that, I'll make the adjustment. And the last part I will add for you is there were like a lot of like tiny details that are not important to the answer you gave. You were just trying to be in a sense, I get what you're trying to do. You were trying to get everything out that was in your head about that. This is where my suggestion would be use the STAR method or something else, doesn't matter, and write out the answer and very briefly in your story bank, and you'll find that your answers become more concise and more powerful at the same time.
Okay, that helps. I guess I have one follow. I realize we're pressed for time, but I've got one follow for you. I guess when somebody asks a question about a 19-page problem statement, right? There's already a lot of content in that on its own, or there's a lot of things on here that are fairly large. Are you setting a filter at that point for so you're asking for something large. Is it safe to expect that's likely a sort of misdirect in order to serve as a filter?
It's
Are you asking more about how I answer the question than you are about the content of what I was actually able to do to solve the problem?
Yeah. What I was asking when I saw that was two things that piqued my interest. So I'm interested in some technical details, but keep it high level. Give me the opportunity to ask follow-up questions, I would say, around the technical details. And
Okay.
then the other part was the impact. I'm also trying to find out, you did this, it was a big thing, 19-page thing. How did it impact the teams that you were working with? You know what? This helped the engineering team a lot. They were able to reduce or streamline their testing process, whatever that may be, right? Give me a little part of storytelling is giving folks a little flavor and allowing them to ask you follow-up questions. Give
Got
me a
it.
little
But
flavor of
along the
it,
lines of what
give
I
me a little bit
asked,
of the impact, and then let me ask follow-up questions.
but along the lines of what I asked, like are you clear on the question that I asked at all?
You asked if it was a misdirect. No, it wasn't a misdirect.
Okay, thank you.
Let's move with a candidate number 2. Okay. I assume that you are looking for a software testing position. Am I right? In QA.
Yes.
In QA. Could you please tell about yourself and about your last project?
Yes. I have almost a decade years of experience as a QA engineer. I started out as a mobile tester in 2016. And when I left my former job, I left as a QA engineer. The last project I worked on was a back end project that required me to test all of our SaaS features on all of our testing environments, QA, QA Delta staging before it went to prod.
Got it. Thanks for sharing that with us, candidate number 2. So I'm looking at your resume here, and yeah, it looks like you spent about 10 years at this company. Can you tell me more about the company and what it does? I see a brief description here, but I just want to hear a little bit more detail.
Yes, Rapid SOS is a software as a service company providing first responders with a unified platform. So when anyone dials 911, the PSAPs, it goes into the PSAP, and the PSAPs will have on their screen our application. And our application has different features for location, for the different activities surrounding first responders. For example, active shooter, location, medical information at their fingertips, and things like that.
Got it. Thanks for sharing that with me. And then can you tell me about your role? Obviously, you spent so much time there, and I know your role has changed over the time, but what part of the software were you testing?
I started out testing, we started out as a phone app. That didn't work out. We pivoted to a web application, and that is where the bulk of my experience has been. I started out when we just offered location services. That went well. And as time went on, we added other features, partnered with other companies, and added other features to enhance our product.
Awesome.
Got it.
Stan, mind if I ask a couple of?
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. Awesome. One of the things you mentioned recently in your experience about browser stack, can you tell me a little bit more about cross-browser testing and how you use browser stack on new releases?
Yes, absolutely. Browser Stack was used when we did an analysis of all the PSAPs, and we learned that so they don't have a lot of funds to upgrade their technology. So a lot of the times they didn't have what we were testing on. I would use Browser Stack as a way to test backwards to make sure that our web app would be sufficient for them. And that is on all of the browsers, primarily Google and Firefox, but all of the browsers.
Yeah. How did you prioritize which browsers and browser versions to test?
We kept a running list that unfortunately was not updated properly, but I would refer back to that list And I would always go all the way back in Browser Stack to the version and the OS. And I would always test those to make sure that our updated product would work with those older browsers and OSs.
Awesome. Thank you. Stan, should we move to feedback?
I actually have another question.
Oh, go for it, please.
Yeah, one thing I love is seeing progression within your company. How has your role changed how has your role changed? And I'm curious why they promoted you, right? At the end of the day, I'm curious about what kind of achievements did you achieve at your company?
Oh, that's a good question. My role really changed significantly during my time there. I was able to, I'd say, brush up against automation. I didn't really have the opportunity to get involved with that at all. But I did do some automation with Playwright and Python. And that is actually my one regret, that I didn't focus on that more while I was there.
Okay, got it. Cool, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, how was that? I'm really nervous right now, guys.
No worries, you're in a safe space. I'll go first. I thought that the explanation of the company, that question that I asked, I thought you started off fairly, I would say. But then as you continued to talk about it, I felt that the quality of the answer went down, right? Someone who's been there for 10 years, I would just expect you to back of your head just know how to talk about the company because you've been there for so long, you've been in the environment, right? You talk about what the product is day in day out, you're testing this. So I was a bit surprised to hear once you started talking about like the use case of the company, like what it's for, who uses it. I was surprised how it took you some time to think about it with a lot of ums in between. So that's one of the feedback I have for that question. Another one I mentioned earlier to candidate one was just be careful about who you talk to. And in this case, you're talking to someone who doesn't know this company, not familiar with this type of product or this environment, and you used an acronym. I'm not sure what it is, but you said PSAPs. No idea what that is. I would say just be careful of using those acronyms when you're talking to specific people.
Would you say if I said, how would you feel if I said it like this? PSAPs are public safety access points. That is who picks up the phone when you dial 911. Should I have explained it like that?
Yeah, that would have been good.
Okay, okay. Awesome.
Let's
Thanks.
see. So there's my feedback there. And then I thought you did a decent job explaining what you tested. I like how you said, hey, I started testing phone. It turns out the app on the phone wasn't that great, didn't really work out. So our company switched over to web, and that's what I tested. So I think that was good, giving a pretty high level overview of that. I think if you wanted to continue answering the question, you could have to provide a little bit more detail. Or if you were done, I would have dug into a little bit more detail of what you tested. But overall, I
Okay.
thought that was a decent answer.
Okay, excellent.
And then the last piece is hearing about your progression over time. I really wanted to hear what makes you a rock star, right? Like, why did they promote you? What were you doing so good? And I felt like you had that opportunity to share your wins with us, whether it's because you were the best on your team or you did things really quickly, you understood the product really well, something along those lines. And I just didn't get that type of answer. And I think instead you were saying how you didn't get a chance to do automation and you had a little bit of experience with that, but you didn't really get a chance to do it. That didn't really answer my question at all.
Excellent.
Cool.
Yeah, I should not point out my weaknesses in interviews. Yes, you're correct.
Yeah. Definitely be yourself. One of the VP of qualities that I've done a couple of mock interviews with, he would call that like a softball question. Be able to identify when you're asked a softball question, it's meant for you to showcase yourself, brag a little bit about yourself, and that's what I would describe as the question Stan asked. Approach it with that enthusiasm, highlight the wins. And if he has any follow-up questions about some things you could have done better, he will ask that. Overall, I will also agree with all the things Stan said, but I'll also add a couple of things. I think think about a little bit about when looking at your resume and your experience, sort of API testing and like the front end testing are going to pop out. So be prepared to answer questions, have some interesting stories in your story bank, how you may have used Postman for API testing to solve a really big problem. Think about cross-browser testing like browser stack. Talk about, I think you could have done better on why you chose the browsers and versions you did. So think about
Okay.
it about that a little bit. And the last thing I'll add is think about rewriting some bullet points in your resume to focus on like power verbs. As an example, you've written created test accounts for front-end automation testing and updated the AWS secret account. That sounds very generic.
Okay.
It doesn't give much, but instead rewriting that drove, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but drove priority for the front-end automation testing team and provided them with specific test steps and test data, right? Changes that impact a little bit. So those are just three things I would add to what Stan
Yeah.
said.
Oh, thank you. Thank you both so much. I have a question for both of you. If you were the hiring manager and you were looking for a senior manual QA engineer, what's your first reaction to my resume?
I think if I'm honest,
Honestly, please.
your resume hints at stories, but your resume itself would not stand out. Compared
Why?
to when I think about other senior QA engineer resumes that I've seen
Oh,
recently. So highlight your impact, reword. You don't have to like redo the whole resume, but think about a few bullet points for each of your experience and then turn them into like high impact. Think about power verbs, and then you start to differentiate yourself. Right now, I would have a hard time differentiating this for a senior QA, especially not having a senior QA title works against you. So you want your resume, like the impact that you had at your company and your position, really stand out and get me curious.
Yep, exactly. And just going to plug this in here, but Evgeny and I actually host resume review sessions where we'll take a look at your resume just like we are doing right now and ask you what it is you're looking for and give you some tips and hints, some feedback on your resume and try to help you make it a better one.
awesome. Thank you both kindly for your honest feedback. And yes, I will be joining the next time you have a resume review.
Before going with the third candidate, I want to address the from candidate number two her question about QA engineer, manual QA engineer. Right now, the job market itself is super high competitive. We have tons of candidates who are experienced, less experienced, but a lot of very well technical experience and not many jobs. So that means it gives to hiring companies the leverage to pick what they want. And actually, they are raising the bars right now, meaning that folks, if you just doing the manual testing, and I'm not saying that just manual testing is clicking buttons and do validation tickets. For the companies where you're working right now, that might be okay. But for the interviews, for the next interviews, for the companies who is hiring right now, it's not going to be okay. And maybe you will ended up in this company doing the regression testing, manual testing, and not doing the automation. but the standards, and again, it raised. So at the same time, you have great AI tools that you can learn right now, any automation, any coding, way much faster without paying crazy amount of dollars to boot camps, to schools, to anyone. You have under your fingertips the great teachers, basically, right? So use it, utilize it. And you can actually create it right now without even coding. So I would say go reverse engineering, build your automation testing by vibe coding, use the AI automation tool, and then just ask them like, hey, you did this, what's this component is, what this does it, right? Right now, it's seen not doing this. It means that you're not curious enough for hiring managers to go dive into that. And technologies is going like crazy. So you cannot afford to not keeping up with the technology world. Yeah, just few my cents. Canada number 3. Please tell us about yourself and about your last project.
Sure. My background is software QA test engineer. And most recently, I worked at a flight test company. We made basically file servers and basically we do data acquisition. And so I was responsible for maintaining our automation, coming up with new acceptance test procedures for the production team to be able to qualify our test products. Also did the chamber automation for environmental stress testing and responsible for several different QA, new product introduction type tasks at the company.
Got it. Thanks for sharing that with us, candidate 3. Can you tell me about your last project and if you've come across any challenges or any roadblocks on that project?
Sure. It's actually not on my resume, but this past year I was selected to join another team. Basically, my title stayed the same, but join another team to help improve the quality for our organization. I was responsible for integration support engineer. I was still doing maintaining automation for the production team, but also was responsible for our when the customer had problem hardware that they wanted to send back. They also had questions on our products. I was responsible for fielding responses, answering support questions, also troubleshooting problem equipment that came back from the field, and also recommending a plan of action for repair.
Thank you. And what made this project challenging?
Some of the products I had not previously worked on before. It was particularly challenging sometimes fielding components that would fail in the field. And mind you, these would be components several years old, and sourcing the actual replacement products was a bit of a challenge at times. And then getting those products in, installing the ISO images that on those products, making sure sometimes some components of that system may need to be changed or modified because the existing components or SSDs were not available. And so we might have to use an alternate SSD that might be slightly modified, but also had to ensure the quality of the product would stay the same and also pass our acceptance test procedure. And so it was a bit of a challenge at times, but it was enjoyable.
Got it. And how many different teams did you have to work with? I'm curious about like how this affected the entire org.
Sure. We had an engineering organization that I had to work with. We have a quality organization aside for just actually engineering quality. It's a quality organization that basically, because we have a lot of government contracts, we work with a lot of military and defense contractors. We have certain requirements that we have to meet before we ship out our products, and so those standards have to make sure that they're followed. And so also purchasing, making sure that the vendors that we use pass certain requirements. So it was a lot of different cross coordination between different teams. Also, we have a manufacturing team that actually manufactures our products here in the U.S. that at the headquarters where I worked at. So working with all those different teams, making sure that they know what's going on. It made a little bit of a challenge, but also made it quite fun as well.
Got it. And did you have any issues or problems working with these teams?
No, sometimes as far as there was other engineers and that I had to work on my team. There was basically a 4-person team, including the manager. So sometimes, depending on what products I'm working on, a product may have to be handed off to myself or vice versa. And so making sure that all of the documentation is able to be signed off on was a bit of a challenge because you have to make sure all the products are sourced correctly and all the serial numbers are correct, and make sure that the product that leaves the door has all the versioning correct and so forth. So that was a bit of a challenge, but I didn't have any issues working with the different ones. We just work through things. If there's something that we need to improve on or I need to improve on, we just mention it and we just try to make sure that the quality gets better.
All right. Thank you. Adil, you got any questions?
Yes, as soon as I can locate the mute button. Awesome. Yes, you talk about in your resume, you had a Python BDD Linux framework for various testing in an embedded Linux environment. Can you tell me a little bit about the challenge with the embedded Linux environment? What were the challenges that you faced specifically? And pick one and maybe tell me a little bit more detail about how did you overcome that challenge?
Sure. One of the challenges, so the Python, this is a behavioral driven development framework. One of the tasks that I had at the company was also making sure that the manufacturing test team had the infrastructure in place. And so I would have to build the servers up and not only update the automation for new products, but also maintain existing products. Also, when products would be change OS, or we would go from, let's say, Red Hat 7 to Red Hat 8, making sure the compatibility would still work as far as when you upgrade some we had some legacy Python 2, and we upgraded everything to Python 3 and above, but we making sure that the different OS compatibility versioning, making sure that the infrastructure is correct, making sure that the test team has what they need, and also the acceptance test procedures are correct, and that we can streamline testing with all the automation that we support. It was a bit of a challenge because we had a number of different products for different test markets. We had flight tests, we had programs that we supported. So it was a bit of a challenge because it's not like we just had one product or one OS that we supported, but multiple OS and different libraries that we had to support.
Yeah. And how did you overcome that? Did you have different scripts for different OS versions, or you were able to maintain that with a single script?
No, there were different scripts. Mainly, we productized it. I productized the automation. So, for example, one product is called 480. It was a 480 V1, a 480 V2. Another product was a 640 V2. Another product, Tough Serve. Another product, Tough Chord. So I did it product based, and we reused it. Like, we had test data files that we reused, and so I could basically didn't have to put those test files in each folder, but had a central folder and just run a script to actually add it to all the different folders once it's on the server that the test person would use. But so mostly it was productized, and it was basically I had to just account for the different OSs per product, as each of them might have an evolution to a newer OS. I just had to account for that in the latest scripts.
Cool. And just the last follow-up question here is that how did you find out about new operating systems coming out? And so how much of I guess also I'm asking is how much of a lead time did you have when you had a new operating system come out for Red Hat, for example?
Sure. So I would be proactive actually, and be on basically whenever Red Hat would have a new release, basically I was notified because I subscribe to their newsletters and whatnot. But also our CTO office, whenever we had new products, basically new processors that we're using, basically it'll be a high level description of PowerPoint of what we intend to use. And so at that time we have basically we're notified of different OSs that may be candidates, and we do our brainstorming at that point.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
questions for us before Stan starts with feedback?
I appreciate all of you guys' feedback so far. Any recommendations as far as my resume, anything I need to improve as far as my questions and answers, all that's welcome because I haven't interviewed in a while. So please welcome as much feedback as you guys have.
Yeah, at a quick glance of your resume, it looks fine. Nothing that really stands out as positive or negative to me. I think you could have more achievements. I do see 1 or 2 bullet points though. Increased productivity 4 times with ESS vibration thermal automation testing. So that's there. But I do think a lot of it is more of your responsibilities, which is fine, but I would like to see more achievements in your resume.
Okay. No, I actually had that as a to-do list to make sure that there's a lot of things that I've done. I just haven't actually quantified it on my resume.
Yeah, and that's good, right? Once you think about your time at this company or that company, you'll be able to write a better resume once you like put some thought into it.
Thank you.
But overall, I thought that your communication was really good. When I asked you questions, you were able to paint the picture for me in a very clear way, providing enough detail, not too much. I was able to paint that picture in my head and understood what you were talking about and your environment. Let me see if I could get into specifics. When I asked you about like a challenging projects, you said, I think you got a pretty good story going on in terms of, okay, you joined another team. The goal was to help improve the quality of the org. You were responsible for XYZ, troubleshooting this or that, and recommending a plan of action. I do think that you did that really well and answered that question really well. There was a missed opportunity to talk to me about your results and like what happened at the end of that project, right? Did you think it was successful? What were you able to achieve, right? Because they brought you over to that team, right? Where did you apply your expertise? So
Okay.
I think that overall, though, it was a pretty good answer. Let's see. Yeah, and I asked about other teams you work with and some challenges. You pretty much said, for the most part, there weren't too many things that was challenging. You just worked with a whole host of people, but you said that if there were any issues, we would just come together and talk it out, which is a fine answer. That's essentially what we all do, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. I agree with Stan. Overall, did a good job of answering questions, painting a picture, and I think you demonstrated really well, leaving openings for follow-up questions. So overall, that's pretty good. I think if you haven't interviewed for a while, what's going to help you is, again, just a reminder, just creating a story bank, just going over in your head some of the highlights. That can be really powerful. So I would recommend and ask you to double click on that. Oh, Stan, I saw you unmuted. Got something?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the story bank thing is 100% true. And the STAR method in general is like the standard, right? But in your storytelling, you're just missing the R piece, which is the results, right? So finish the story with, okay, this is what happened, and this is why I'm telling you this story.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And generally, I just have a follow-up. Generally, with the STAR method or the storytelling, how many stories do you recommend having like fresh in your mind? Is it maybe 3, or is there a number that you guys kind of know is like the magic number?
No magic number for me. Personally, when I interview, I have a like a Word doc basically of different stories I have, right? And how I prepare for it is I take a look at who I'm talking to, the companies they're at, their values. I anticipate the questions that they ask, and then I'll tailor a story to that question, right? So I could use the same story for 3 or 4 different questions. It's just the way I answer it and tweak a little bit of the information that I share will be a little bit different. But in general, yeah, you should have quite a bit of stories just to tell in case this question gets asked or that question gets asked.
Okay. That's good. That's good feedback. Thank you.
I would say at a minimum, definitely have 3.
Okay.
For me personally, like if I get to 12, like that would be probably really hard for me to scan through and pick one. But the answer just really depends on you. And just remember, it's to help you with a few questions. Have a few questions that you're going to answer where it can flow really easily. That's the goal. It's not a cheat sheet for every single question that you're going to be asked. It's just to help you jog your memory, if you will.
Okay. Oh, thanks, guys. That's good.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you, candidate number 3. Let's
you.
move forward. We have like last candidate and a couple. Let's take it 10 minutes. But before, just wanted to say, check your email. We already send you a newsletter request. So we'll send these updates about our events like this and resume reviews in Slack and through the email. So check your email inbox. All right. Candidate number 4. Please tell us about yourself and about your last project.
Yeah, I'm candidate number 4, currently a senior software engineer targeting similar roles. And my most recent project would be through a consulting firm. I was working with a personal banking institution on a very large data modernization and just usage platform so that they could start to be able to use live data from their customers to give them financial insights based on their financial health, things of that nature. That composed of several sub-projects, but the role I was playing on that was as a kind of senior DevOps software and cloud engineer, just switching between multiple hats to be able to provide whatever skills or services were needed for those sub projects. It was a startup mentality. That included several projects, such as a lot of MVPs or POCs for different pieces of cloud infrastructure, testing new cloud services. All this was run on Azure. For example, we had a POC for running Azure Synapse with a couple of function apps and some storage attached and making sure that would work. So I was working with a software engineering team that was owning that project, helping them with the development as needed, and then also directly owning the corresponding DevOps work to set up all the infrastructure as code so that was reproducible, all the CI/CD infrastructure so that was deployable from sandbox to production, and then also a lot of inter-team communication to ensure that the right awareness and buy-in was had by any related stakeholders. And then another similar project was creating a full YAML library for CI/CD deployment infrastructure that was project-wide and then eventually used to bootstrap and as the blueprint for additional client projects that they started to stand up for different business initiatives.
All right. Thanks for sharing that information with me. I was actually going to ask you what was the most complex or challenging project that you worked on, but I think you did share a lot of information with me there already. But it sounds like you were working cross-functionally with a lot of different teams. It looks like it sounds like these projects are huge undertakings, right? Where there's multiple stakeholders involved. Can you tell me a time where maybe you had a disagreement or something just you and someone weren't agreeing on a process or something about the project, and tell me how that was resolved?
Absolutely. So that final project I mentioned where we were building out that YAML library, that really blew the doors off as far as a whole new number of teams and new team members that I hadn't worked with prior to that. So because of that, there were a lot of differing opinions on some of the engineering directions we were going to go down. And one engineer I ended up being directed towards is someone who had owned some previous versions of similar initiatives. It was one of those situations where he'd become very siloed. He had several outstanding, long-lasting work directives that just weren't ever really resolved. So he became the go-to person of, oh, you're going to work on CI/CD for function apps or event grid. Go talk to this guy. And what that led to is that he wasn't collaborating well, he wasn't sharing his work initiatives well, and also things weren't moving forward. That was the seed of a few kind of ideological conflicts on how to move forward. He had very specific ways that he wanted to do things, and he was an excellent engineer. It's just that they weren't happening. The results were not being delivered. So the approach I took to it was really just meeting him, first understanding where he was at, and then meeting him there and trying to walk things back towards the center versus fully in his court and realign with some of our mandates of getting things delivered quickly. And then that also allowed for some more flexibility and openness in the actual engineering conversations of how things were going to be written. This was a template-based library, so we were creating a very large collection of different stages of, or sorry, different levels within CI/CD pipelines to be inherited by any CI/CD engineer and use as they needed in their pipeline. So we were able to fine tune and really drill down to specific choices and also commit to these choices and get product shipped. So we did end up resolving that and working that out, but that was certainly a significant challenge at the beginning.
Thanks, candidate 4.
Awesome. Thank you. Next question I had for you. Can you tell me about a recent project you worked on with a team? Something that you were particularly proud of, and what part did you play in that team to get that project completed?
Yeah, there was a project where we had to do actually several rounds of some infrastructure migrations in our existing Azure footprint due to missed security compliance with how some of those resources were configured. That involved quite a few people, several members of my direct team. We had additional CI/CD engineers working alongside me so that we had knowledge redundancy on the team so that it wasn't just one person who knew what was going on, and also to spread the workload around so that we could get things moved through faster. I was working with my manager also directly, because he gave this project to me to run, but I was giving him updates so that in his update calls, he was able to communicate and show progress. We had some stakeholders on the security team, cloud security team. So I was working with them to ensure that our configurations were up to spec and also that they were just happy with the direction, how things were going. We also had some resources from the Microsoft side because they were stepping in to just provide assistance and make sure that things were going well. So I was liaising with them. But I was very proud of that effort because we were able to complete those migrations successfully. We didn't see any drop in service or availability, any related metrics in any of the environments from sandbox to prod. We felt just very good with that result. And it required a lot of communication as well as a lot of just rigor and really following all the way through on every single idea or initiative, and a lot of good engineering oversight from everybody. And I'm very proud of that one because it's something that did not turn into too many chefs spoil the soup, but there was a lot of potential for that if things hadn't gone as smoothly.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. That's all the question I had, Stan. Over to you.
All right.
Cool. Stan, mind if I go first?
Yeah, go first.
Okay. I wanted to take Stan's thunder away. I think both the questions you answered, you did a really good job. You made it so easy for me as an interviewer to just check that off. Yes, that was done. I'll let Stan go into more detail about the question he asked, but the question that I just asked, it has those hints, right? Something that you enjoy doing, a teamwork, and you were able to really pick up on that, where I think that's a common mistake. I'll be the first one that I've made in the past is not pick up on what I think Stan called who your audience, knowing your audience. You picked up well on your audience and what they were looking for. So you did a really good job of answering the question. You set the situation, task, action, results. All of that was covered really well. Kudos to you on that one. Keep up that. My only feedback for you is, if you look at, I don't know if you rushed it for this process, but you have 2 bullet points for your most recent position, and then something from 2018, you have 3 or 4 bullet points. I would say highlight that a little bit more. Also, just know that you are going for senior roles, so you will get asked these open-ended questions, and you'll have to navigate. You'll have to figure out the best way to answer. So, did a good job. Just expect more of those open-ended questions.
No, it makes sense. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add to that. You did really well answering the question without stumbling or missing a beat. Overall, I think your communication is, I would say, pretty top tier, or at least answering these 2 questions that we have. One thing I noticed that you did that was a cherry on top was when Adil asked you the question about a challenging situation, you talked about it, right? The results. And then at the very end of the last one or two sentence, you said, and this is why I thought, and this is why I was particularly proud of this project. So you circled back to the question that was being asked and just provided that extra context of, okay, this is why I'm telling you this story.
Yeah.
No, thank
And
you. I
also,
appreciate that. Sorry,
and also when looking for senior candidates, you're looking for two things. You're looking for, hey, can they take open-ended problems and solve them? And the other thing is, are they going to be able to take other people on the ride with them? So when you share your enthusiasm, you make it easy. You give that impression that you're easy to work with when you do that.
I appreciate that. To that point, and I also want to say some of the feedback you guys gave earlier as far as the timing on answering some of these questions and almost cutting it off before you feel comfortable. I was thinking about that when I was giving my answers because I think in my own interview experiences, I've caught myself rambling. So these both felt uncomfortably short. So I think that was great advice. And I just want to call that out. When you're talking, Adil, about the two high level points to hit for these senior conversations of being able to go from the abstract to the specific, as well as being able to work well with people. The very raw question, but sometimes those questions can be in a gray area between a technical question versus more of a behavioral or a team dynamics question. And I'm wondering, what would your recommendation be as far as how much technical should I look to inject into that versus cross-functional team versus project management or mentoring juniors, the non-exclusively technical?
Yeah, it will depend a little bit on the interviewer. I would say continue. I think you do a good job anyway of picking up quickly at least in the two questions we covered here. So trust your instincts. I would say first. And secondly, and the reason I say that, like, there are a couple of interview styles. One is that people will ask like these technical, what's the word, system design questions and behavioral questions. They'll try to be very clear about them. That's one type of interviewer. The other interviewer is not going to be very, very clear about it. But I think if you keep it brief, you give them a chance to ask follow-up questions or guide you to another direction. Or if you're unsure, you can ask them as well. That's a really good point, but that would be my feedback. It can be if you're getting good signals as to if it's a technical or behavioral questions, trust your instinct, I would say first. And secondly, if you're unsure, then get clarification.
No, that's great. Thank you. I'm going to keep that in mind. My one final point to provide, because we were talking about the structure of my resume, and I totally aware of that it's bottom heavy. The reason for that is my prior position at the company that has the majority of those bullet points. I was laid off for economic reasons, so I pivoted into doing my best as an independent consultant. And the scale and impact of any sort of project or initiatives I've been involved with since then just does not compare. It's so much smaller. So there's less to mention, I feel. But since that stood out, I may be guessing, but it looks like it stood out to both of you. High level, what are your thoughts on that with the additional context? Do I need to have some more meat there, or is this something that I can provide that context and then address it in that way?
Yeah, I definitely understand your reasons for doing that. But I would say, think of it this way. It's harder for somebody to know something is right versus it's very easy for them to pick up if something doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right. I know your motivation, and that makes sense, but think of it again from your audience's perspective. I would add more meat. I would also, when you're answering questions, I would try to pick examples from that experience that's not recent, that the one before that's got the meat, but don't let your resume suffer because of that. Keep that mindset, but with your resume, balance it out. And even if you think it's not as cool, if you will, you don't know how the somebody else might feel. I think maybe Stan, you have a few better examples, concrete examples that he could add there.
No, I echo everything you just said. I get why you did what you did, but to someone who doesn't know you, you essentially want to buff up whatever it is you're doing, even if it feels not as good as your previous experience. You want to make every experience count to the eyes of whoever is looking at your resume.
Okay. No, that makes perfect sense. And I really appreciate that feedback. It's very helpful, very helpful.
Yeah, just to add up to Adil's standing point, guys, like your resume is your pitch, right? And if Adil and Stan and me or anyone reader has question in your resume, it actually works against you. You don't have a chance to explain this thing. Like I got your motive, like why you put you're not comfortable to talk that bragging about your existing consulting experience, but you don't have this chance explaining this off the resume. So you have like very high chances that your resume will not get picked just because of that. You will get picked, then you can talk about it. But yeah, just take it as a feedback. You want
No,
to,
it's
yeah.
sorry, that's great. It's just great. It was a recent change I did, and I wasn't sure if it was a good idea or not. So it's good to see, sorry, good to hear how it looks from your perspectives.
Yeah,
That it sounds.
anything that raise question, it
Mhm.
works right away against you. And
Okay.
that means you'll degrade your chances to get picked. That's it. It works for all resumes that we saw today. Anything that in your head you want to explain, you want to add something, oh, I didn't do this because I have this. No chances to explain besides your resume. Your resume is the only thing that you can explain.
Perfect.
Uh,
Thank you.
I'm
Thank
suggesting, yeah, thank you, candidate number four. I'm suggesting a deal, Daniel. Let's wrap it up and maybe briefly summarize for we have four candidates. And honestly, I'm very grateful that we gave a chance for candidate number four, even we didn't have time, right? We're already like more than 10 minutes off. But I want to say something. I think each candidate and each person who participated today, candidate number five, I'm sorry, we don't have time to go through, but you will be the first one in the next mock interview. Just message me in the Slack channel. I'll rest assured you'll be the first one. But it's very valuable, I think, today for all people who looked at the mock interviews today. And we saw four candidates. And I know it's very stressful to go through that, but you all can basically see who was more prepared, who was less prepared, and that gives you, and again, this is great time to practice. That means you can learn lesson or you cannot. You can just move forward with whatever you think is it. But I think the candidate number four, like on my opinion, not set aside the resume, he was more prepared for in terms of performance of during the interview. Candidate number three was also rehearsed. Candidate number two needs definitely polish the story, make it more engaging. Candidate number one, I'll take it as a first one was maybe more nervous, but definitely I feel candidate number one was more offensive on defensive, I would say. It sounds candidate number one was defensive. But again, I'll take it as a first round of interview. Obviously, it could be very stressful. Yeah, that's my opinion. What do you guys think? Anything to add?
Yeah, I think these are great sessions. You obviously learn appreciate all four, five even though didn't get a chance to go volunteer, because obviously you learn something for yourself. So number one is when you're learning something for yourself, understand like what's a strength and what's an opportunity. And if you're doing well somewhere, maybe think about investing around the opportunities for you. And for all four, it was something different. And the final thing is that interviewing is such a I know very few people who are good at it without practice. So coming here, doing this, listening to others, even those who didn't participate, is a really great way. Practice in front of the mirror, record yourself, ask friends, show up over here. But interviewing is an important skill. If you're getting interviews, all of those interviews are chances, and you want to maximize them by presenting yourself in the best way possible. And really think of I'll harp on this point again. Think of the recruiter as your biggest advocate, right? And think of the folks that you are interviewing with as having a vested interest in hiring you. Like nobody, regardless of the job market, like good or bad, very few hiring managers I know want to really drag out the process, especially at anything below like a mega company, like even large, small, medium. I'd be more than happy to hire the first, if I have an open position, I'd be more than happy to hire the first person that I interview. I'm not really interested in interviewing 4 or 5 people if I don't have to. I will if I have to, but I don't want to. So go in there with that mindset. Recruiter is your biggest advocate. When you're not there, they're advocating for yourself. And then everybody you're interviewing is really interested in helping you give them examples that they can go back and say, yes, it's a hire, and these are the reasons.
Yep, you took a lot of that out of my mouth. But yeah, the biggest thing I always tell my candidates is that interviewing is a skill set, right? And to definitely be prepared for the interview. Thank you guys so much for joining today. I'm sure you guys learned a lot, but now the next step is to actually take some shots, right? If I had to use a basketball analogy, you could watch all the videos you want. You could get all the verbal teachings from somebody about how to shoot, let's say, a free throw. But unless you actually go out there and start like rehearsing, right? Rehearsing in front of a mirror, recording yourself, taking different interviews, you're not going to get too much better at it. One thing I personally do is after every interview, I go back and I think about it, right? I dissect the questions that were asked and how I could improve myself next time. Areas where I felt like I did a great job answering, areas where I felt like maybe I should have used a different example, or maybe I should have framed it a different way. I go back and I do that and think about it. But overall, it's one of those things where you have to grab that opportunity once you get that interview. Yevgeny and I host a resume review session, and I think some people get way too hung up on how good the resume is. You could only get it so good. You could only get it so good. But once you get that window open and have that chance to interview, that is the most important thing you could do in terms of getting a job. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining this and taking our feedback.
Thank you guys. Yeah. Next week, by the way, whoever is in Los Angeles, we're gonna do the in-person meetup at Adil's company, Centerfield. So welcome to join, please. It's a free event, really good for networking. But if no, we'll continue doing the resume review the following week, in 2 weeks, basically. And yeah, again, follow us on YouTube channel, LinkedIn, and hope you guys all will get job as soon as possible. I know it's stressful, but keep going. Thanks so much, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Thanks all.